I want to start by telling you the truth. I didn't go to Palestine to find God. I didn't go seeking faith. I went seeking understanding of a place, of people, of a story we're often only told in fragments. But life has a way of unraveling us in the best possible way when we finally step out of what we know. Palestine unraveled me. I saw things I wasn't prepared to see, the walls, the checkpoints, the occupation. But more than that, I saw something else, something no camera could ever capture, faith that could not be broken. There was something unshakable in the way people walked, prayed, resisted, and loved. I remember watching a boy, maybe 12 years old, share half his sandwich with someone who had none. He smiled. No one told him to. It was just who he was. That moment, like so many others, whispered something to me. There's a deeper way to live, a freer way to believe. I kept watching, listening, learning. Islam wasn't being explained to me. It was being lived in front of me, and it was beautiful. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was quiet and resilient, like the people who carried it. I saw men and women pray not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I saw people fast during hardship and still offer me food. I saw strength not in force, but in surrender, and that's when I realized this wasn't weakness. This was power rooted in peace. This was faith anchored in purpose. I didn't convert on a whim. I converted because, for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not by people, but by God. In the middle of a land surrounded by conflict, I found the quietest kind of clarity, that I didn't want to keep running from the questions I was afraid to ask. That maybe surrender isn't giving up. Maybe surrender is finally letting go of everything false we hold on to. Becoming Muslim wasn't a loss of identity. It was the beginning of knowing myself more deeply. Palestine didn't just teach me about struggle. It taught me about truth, and truth, when it touches your heart, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be felt. I didn't find Islam. Islam found me. In the courage of the oppressed, in the kindness of strangers, and in the stillness of the soul. Transformation begins when we step outside our comfort zones. We like to believe that growth is neat, controlled, maybe even comfortable if we do it right. But the truth is, growth usually comes wrapped in discomfort, in unfamiliarity, in questions that don't have neat answers. I didn't go to Palestine looking to change my life. I went because I was curious, because I wanted to understand a story that the world often tells in black and white about borders, about conflict, about history. But what I found was something far more personal, far more intimate. I found a mirror being held up to the deepest parts of myself. Stepping into that space, a place so different from what I knew, stripped away my sense of control. Everything felt unfamiliar, the language, the culture, the rhythm of life, but instead of fear, I felt strangely at peace. Maybe that's because in the unfamiliar, we stop relying on our assumptions. We begin to see with fresh eyes. We begin to listen, and in Palestine, what I saw and heard pierced something in me I didn't even know needed piercing. I watched people who had every reason to be angry walk with incredible grace. I saw families hold on to hope not as a fantasy, but as a daily choice. I saw prayers rise not from fear, but from love, from a place of trust that runs deeper than circumstance. That was unsettling in the best way. It made me realize how much of my own life I had spent searching for certainty while running from stillness. I had asked so many questions in my life about purpose, about truth, about what it means to really live. But I never slowed down enough to truly hear the answers. In that unfamiliar place, I started to ask new questions. Not what do I believe, but what do I need to let go of in order to believe anything at all? And not what is faith, but what kind of life do I want my heart to belong to? These weren't easy questions, but they were honest. And when I allowed myself to ask them, I also found the courage to sit with their answers. The truth is, it wasn't about finding Islam as much as it was about being brave enough to recognize that something inside me had been waiting to be found. Sometimes it's not the answers that change us, but the questions we finally dare to ask. I stepped out of my comfort zone thinking I was exploring a new place. But what I was really doing was exploring a new possibility of myself, a version that had always existed beneath the surface, just waiting to be called forward. Transformation didn't happen in one moment. It happened in 1,000 quiet ones. When I listened instead of spoke, when I felt instead of analyzed, when I trusted instead of controlled. And in that sacred space of uncertainty, I didn't lose myself. I found something truer. Faith isn't always something you sit down and study. Sometimes it's something you witness in motion, quietly, powerfully, and without announcement. That's exactly what happened to me in Palestine. I didn't attend lectures. I wasn't handed books. No one tried to preach to me. What I experienced was far more profound. I saw faith being lived, day in and day out, in a way that no textbook could ever convey. In a land where hardship is a daily reality, you expect to see exhaustion, bitterness, maybe even hopelessness. But instead, I saw people standing tall with something luminous in their eyes. I watched them greet each other with warmth, care for strangers like family, and pray with a presence that made the world feel still. And what moved me most wasn't the grandeur of it. It was the simplicity. It was watching a father carry his child to the mosque before dawn, watching a shopkeeper pause to offer water to someone tired, watching a woman smile after being delayed for hours at a checkpoint. These weren't grand gestures, but in those moments I felt like I was witnessing something sacred. I didn't need anyone to explain Islam to me after that. I could see it. I could feel it in the way people loved, in the patience they extended, in how they held on to dignity when it would have been easier to give in to despair. There was no room for performance. It was real, and that's what made it so powerful. I realized that true belief isn't always found in words. It's found in action, in how people show up for each other, and how they hold on to hope not just with their minds, but with their hearts. It challenged me, because I had always thought of faith as something you had to understand first, as if it needed to be logically dissected before it could be felt. But here were people who embodied it, and that embodiment taught me more than any argument ever could. I saw how faith wasn't just something they practiced. It was something they became. It shaped their posture in the world. It shaped how they responded to hardship, how they found joy in the small things, and how they stayed generous even when they had little to give. That kind of faith can't be memorized. It can't be mimicked. It's something that has to grow in the soul and move through the body. It has to become part of you. And the people I met, without even knowing it, were showing me that kind of faith every single day. I didn't become Muslim because someone convinced me. I became Muslim because I saw what it looked like to walk through fire and still choose grace. That kind of faith, the kind that doesn't just survive but uplifts, doesn't need to be explained. It simply needs to be lived. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. We're taught that strength means control, that to be strong is to hold your ground, to fight, to push forward no matter what. We're told that surrender is giving up, that it's weakness, that letting go means losing. But in Palestine, I learned that we've been misunderstanding strength all along. I saw people who had been pushed to their limits, who had every reason to be hardened, choose instead to soften. I saw people surrender, not in defeat, but in deep trust. And it was the most courageous thing I had ever witnessed. Surrender wasn't about passivity. It was about knowing when to stop carrying everything alone. It was about standing in the storm and saying, "Even now, I trust." That trust didn't look like weakness. It looked like stillness in chaos. It looked like patience when every instinct said to react. It looked like people choosing prayer instead of revenge, dignity instead of despair. That kind of surrender takes strength most of us aren't taught. It takes strength to let go of your illusion of control. It takes strength to say, "I don't have all the answers, but I believe there is meaning here." When I watched people pray, I didn't just see ritual. I saw a kind of peace that doesn't come from certainty, but from surrendering to the unknown with love. Their bodies bowed, but their spirits stood tall. They weren't collapsing. They were rising. That changed something in me. I realized how tightly I had been holding onto fear, to the need to figure everything out, to the belief that I had to manage everything on my own. And the truth is, that's exhausting. Living like that wears down your soul. But the people I met, though surrounded by hardship, carried a lightness I couldn't explain, until I understood it was surrender. It's not easy to surrender. It feels risky. It means trusting something greater than your own logic, your own timeline, your own ego. But when I finally allowed myself to stop fighting everything, to stop demanding certainty, something opened up inside me. I felt still. I felt held. I felt like maybe I didn't need to have it all figured out to be okay. That maybe faith was less about proving something and more about letting go of the need to prove anything at all. That's when I began to understand Islam, not as a system of rules, but as an invitation to live from the inside out. To trust that in bowing down, we are actually rising. To know that letting go isn't losing, it's making room. That's not weakness. That's a deep, quiet strength that doesn't shout. It just is. So when I say I became Muslim, I don't mean I became perfect. I mean I learned what it means to surrender, not to give up, but to finally come home to something greater than myself. And that is the most powerful kind of strength I've ever known. I always thought clarity would come during peaceful times. I imagined it would arrive gently, on a quiet morning, with a clear sky, maybe after everything in my life had finally settled. I thought spiritual insight required stability, maybe even comfort, but that's not how it happened for me. Clarity found me in the middle of noise, confusion, and conflict. In a land I wasn't from, among people I didn't yet understand, in a moment of life that felt more like unraveling than discovery. Palestine wasn't an escape. It wasn't a retreat from the world. It was the real world, raw, honest, unfiltered. I saw things I wasn't prepared to see. I saw how people lived under pressure most of us can't imagine. I saw how children learned resilience too early. I saw heartbreak, but I also saw something I didn't expect, clarity. A kind of knowing that didn't come from having everything figured out, but from living close to what truly matters. I didn't expect to find God there, but I did. Not in grand declarations or shining visions, but in small, sacred moments that pulled me out of myself. I remember walking through narrow streets in Jerusalem, passing people whose eyes held both sorrow and light. I remember standing outside Al-Aqsa Mosque and hearing the call to prayer echo through the air, and feeling something shift inside me, something I couldn't name at the time. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. But in that quiet, I saw something I had never allowed myself to see, that I had been searching without knowing what I was searching for. Sometimes hardship clears away everything that doesn't matter. It strips life down to its essence. It makes us ask better questions, and in that raw space, where all distractions fall away, something real begins to emerge. That's what happened to me. I didn't come to Palestine to change my beliefs, but the experience changed me, not through comfort, but through a kind of sacred disruption. It interrupted my assumptions. It made me uncomfortable in the best possible way. And in that discomfort, I found honesty. Clarity doesn't always come when things are easy. In fact, ease can sometimes keep us asleep, but hardship has a way of waking us up. It's in the struggle, the uncertainty, the cracks in our carefully controlled lives, where something greater can finally reach us. That's what happened to me. I didn't hear a voice or see a sign. I just slowly, steadily began to feel drawn towards something that made more sense than anything else ever had. That clarity didn't give me all the answers, but it gave me something more important, the courage to walk toward the unknown, the willingness to trust what I was feeling, and the strength to say yes to a new path, even if I couldn't explain it to everyone. In the middle of a place so full of pain, I found something profoundly healing, and that unexpected clarity became the beginning of my journey to Islam. For most of my life, I thought belonging meant blending in. I thought it meant learning the rules of the room, shaping myself to match the people around me, softening the parts of myself that didn't quite fit. And for a while, I got good at it, at adapting, at performing, at adjusting my edges so I wouldn't stand out too much. But even when I was surrounded by people, even when I was accepted, I felt this emptiness I couldn't explain. Like I was everywhere but nowhere. Like I was present but not known. I didn't have the words for it then, but now I know what it was. I was fitting in, not belonging. And there's a difference, a huge one. Fitting in asks you to change. Belonging asks you to return to who you are. I didn't know I was looking for that kind of belonging when I visited Palestine. I didn't go there thinking I would have a spiritual awakening or shift the entire course of my identity. I went as an outsider, with questions and assumptions, unsure of what I would find. But what I found wasn't just history or politics or resistance. I found a people deeply anchored in something that wasn't about appearances or performance. They weren't trying to fit in. They were grounded in truth, culturally, spiritually, personally. There was a kind of freedom in the way people showed up as they were. Women in hijab walking with confidence. Men praying on the side of the street without hesitation. Strangers offering help without hesitation, and not because it looked good, but because it was who they were. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to hide anything to be in their presence. I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel like I had to earn my space. I just felt human. As I began learning more about Islam, something strange happened. I didn't feel like I was adding something foreign to my life. I felt like I was remembering something I already knew but had forgotten. The more I read, the more I felt like the teachings of Islam were putting language to something my soul had always longed for but didn't know how to name. Meaning, consistency, mercy, truth. Not someone else's version of truth, but the truth. And in that truth, I began to feel safe enough to be fully myself. For the first time. When I embraced Islam, it wasn't about abandoning who I had been. It was about uncovering who I had always been underneath the layers of expectation, fear, and performance. It didn't feel like becoming someone new. It felt like finally standing still, breathing deep, and saying, "This is who I am." Not because someone told me to be this way, but because I had finally returned to what was real. Belonging, I realized, is not something the world gives you. It's something that awakens when you live in alignment with your truth. And Islam, for me, was that awakening. It's a strange thing when your heart begins to change in ways you can't fully explain. I didn't land in Palestine expecting a spiritual shift. I wasn't searching for a new religion. In fact, I arrived carrying more questions than answers, more curiosity than conviction. I wanted to learn, to understand a land I had only known through headlines and second-hand stories. What I didn't expect was that in watching others live their faith, something dormant inside me would slowly begin to wake up. No one tried to convince me of anything. There were no debates, no arguments, no pressure. What there was presence. A quiet, steady presence of people who lived their beliefs, not just in words, but in every action, every gesture, every breath. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was deeply human. And it was unshakable. I saw men pausing their lives to place their foreheads to the ground in prayer, not because it was easy, but because it was truth. I saw women wear their faith like armor, not to hide, but to stand tall. I saw teenagers reciting verses while walking through rubble. I saw elders holding on to hope after losing everything, and none of it felt performative. It felt real. It felt lived. There's something deeply humbling about standing next to someone whose belief is so firm that nothing around them can shake it. It makes you ask yourself, what do I stand for? What holds me when everything else falls away? What truth do I return to when life becomes unbearable? I didn't have good answers to those questions at the time, but the people I met did not always in words, but in the way they carried themselves. Their faith wasn't separate from their daily lives. It was their daily life. It was the breath between every word, the strength behind every act of kindness, the anchor in every moment of uncertainty. I watched, and something inside me softened, not because I was being persuaded, but because I was witnessing something beautiful and whole and deeply grounded. That kind of faith doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It simply invites, and in that invitation, I felt something begin to stir inside me. I didn't suddenly believe overnight. It was gradual, quiet, honest, but the more I opened my heart, the more I realized that what I was seeing wasn't foreign. It was familiar. It was the kind of faith I had always hoped existed in the world, but had never quite seen up close. Palestine didn't convert me, it showed me. It gave me a living example of what it looks like to walk with God, even in the middle of chaos. And once I saw it, once I felt it, I couldn't go back to the way things were. I didn't adopt their faith to become someone else. I chose it because, for the first time, I saw what real, unshakable belief looked like. And I was ready to meet it.